Hi, welcome to Bible for the Busy Woman with me, Melissa Younger. Today we're going to be talking a little bit about the Sermon on the Mount, and we're going to introduce the beatitudes. We're going to go through Matthew 5, 1 through 5. So basically last week we were talking about how Jesus was starting his ministry and he was healing and teaching people. And then today we're going to be talking about how in the Sermon on the Mount, some of these people had come with him up onto a mountain. And they were disciples who were interested in learning from him. And remember, he had already recruited some of his apostles at this time. It just uses the general word disciples, so there could have been some other people there who were not necessarily chosen as his apostles later. So we're going to look at Matthew 5, 1 through 5. Seeing the crowds, he went up on the mountain, and when he sat down, his disciples came to him, and he opened his mouth and taught them, saying, Blessed are the poor in spirit, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. Blessed are those who mourn, for they shall be comforted. Blessed are the meek, for they shall inherit the earth. So we have these three together, the poor in spirit, mourning, the meek, and those types of people are mentioned often in the Old Testament, and there's good reason to mourn. There's good reason to feel poor in spirit, and the reason is sin. If you look at how Matthew 5, 1 through 5 lays alongside Luke, Luke tends to emphasize more of the maybe physical aspects of these, whereas Matthew's focusing on the more spiritual. They're not just poor, they're poor in spirit. People who are recognizing their need for Jesus and their need to be saved from their sin. There's mourning because there's real loss. There's a lot of different losses that we should be mourning. We should be mourning our loss of our relationship with God. We should be mourning, death is a consequence of sin. We can receive comfort from the Holy Spirit right now, but we will ultimately receive comfort when there's nothing left to mourn about in the future. And then blessed are the meek, for they shall inherit the earth. So the meek are just people who don't assert themselves over others. But this doesn't necessarily mean people who are weak. And we can look at some Old Testament passages to help us understand meekness a little bit. I think that one is harder for us to understand. Psalm 37:11 says, But the meek shall inherit the land and delight themselves in abundant peace. So this is similar to what Jesus is saying here. Now, in the context there, it was talking about how we ought to commit our way to the Lord, trust in him, and he will act. That's verse 5, Psalm 37, verse 5. He will bring forth righteousness as the light and your justice as the noonday. This is trusting that God will act, that we're not going to be trying to dominate others, that we're not going to be pushing for ourselves, that we're going to trust God to do that, that God's going to bring about justice in the end. We want to have some level of self-advocacy, right? We're not being doormats, but we're also not trying to take vengeance on others. We're not becoming defensive. In the Greek world, what blessing meant to these people was that they would share in the privilege of the gods, which meant that they could escape normal suffering. And so that's maybe what some of these people were looking for. And Jesus turns that on its head, and he says that the real blessing is having divine approval instead. So it's not this escape from suffering, even though he is alleviating some of their suffering, their present suffering. But he's saying the real blessing here is the spiritual blessing, and I don't want you to miss out on that. Okay, and that is part of what we can take as our application today is, are we focusing on the spiritual blessings, or are we getting caught up in asking him for material things often? Are you thinking about how Jesus has saved you and what he's done for you on the cross and all the blessings of grace and mercy, that you can have a relationship with him? Let's stay in the Word and seeking the Lord together.